I can remember several like goofy comedies that like display like an archetype of an electronic music person, and it's always like this weird little dweeb who's antisocial versus, like the power rock guitarists or something like that, which are, cool and hip and sexy. And I think that's so interesting. That was a really serious like cultural perspective that a lot of people had for a long time, and nowadays, that's more or less gone.
In this episode of The BOM, Engineering a Path Forward, we're talking about the process of turning engineering components into musical instruments, and how that has the potential to change many aspects of our culture. At least that's what my guest today, Kirk Pearson, founder of Dogbotic, believes. Dogbotic is a music and sound research collective that's redefining what music is and is working to make musical and electronics engineering education more accessible. Today, Kirk walks us through a brief history of the crossover between engineers and musicians, how AI-generated music could deaden the more interesting aspects of music culture, and why, no matter where you go, there's probably a lovable eccentric in a garage building a strange musical instrument out of spare parts. This is my conversation with Kirk Pearson, and this is The BOM. We live in a time where design and technology touch every aspect of our lives. But where did it all come from? Who designed it? How is it built and brought to market? What will it look like in a year, 2 years, 100 years? From the phones and smartwatches that help us in our day-to-day to the cutting-edge spaceships and 3D printers that are leading us into the future, modern design is constantly shaping the way we work, communicate, problem solve, and play. And every new design, big or small, starts with an idea and a bill of materials. I'm Magenta Strongheart, and this is The BOM, where we talk to leading innovators in the tech world and celebrate the transformational power of design. Kirk, thank you so much for joining us today on The BOM. I'm so excited to learn all about Dogbotic and sort of your story, how you got to starting this awesome studio.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So my understanding is that you all are part music production studio. You make original compositions and produce things for all different kinds of clients. You're also a research lab, which I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about what that means in this space. And then last but of course not least, you guys offer educational workshops for kind of all things music and sound making and production and hardware and technology that goes into that. You make some awesome kits. I love the graphics and branding of everything, by the way, on your site. It's really
thank you.
A joy to kind of look through. So tell us a little bit more about how this all comes together and what each part, kind of works on.
Yeah, well, it's a very hard company to pitch people because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But effectively, Dogbotic is a collective of musicians, composers, sound designers, and creative engineering types, and we do all sorts of projects together. So I'm a composer myself, and I started Dogbotic as really an outlet for me to be able to, sell my music for money. So I started out, doing composition for film and TV and sound design and stuff like that. And then it kind of expanded into all sorts of other weird things. Sometimes people, needed a very specific musical instrument engineered and I could build it. Or, sometimes people would need me to research a very specific array of speakers for a particular special effect or something. And so it kind of grew from a purely creative studio into like a research project as well. And then over the pandemic, in the first few months of the pandemic, all of that live work just kind of dried up immediately, as it did for so many people. And it took us a couple months before we realized, hey, we know how to do a whole lot of this stuff, and everyone seems to be at home now. So we came up with the idea of teaching a one-off build-your-own synthesizer workshop where I would literally send you a big crate of whimsically designed materials, and we'd spend 2 months together building it out into a working synthesizer. And much to my delight, that ended up kind of catching on, and we're still doing that 4 years later.
Some of the titles of the workshops are super fun, and I love that you explained a little bit across the range of what you all offer, because there's, so many directions we could dive deeper into from there, but we won't get too carried away. But it's also interesting to just hear how it's grown really organically, from primarily this synth workshop that could be, a little more straightforward to all these different kind of curiosities that people have within this world. And I love that. I think a lot of projects like this, we try to do kind of some similar stuff at Design Lab where it can be a really great foot in the door to bigger engineering concepts and topics and things that might be a little intimidating or overwhelming. But having this kind of fun entry point with something familiar like a Walkman or a synth or, any number of things can really help people jump off into the deep end later of all things engineering and design and production.
I totally agree. A thing that I say so much to the point where it's kind of cliche is the great thing about building synthesizers is you're not like building elevator braking systems, in that when you're building an elevator braking system, it better work the same way every time. With a synthesizer, we're making waves of sound that are culturally interesting.
Totally. I love that you brought up kind of the empowerment of building something hands-on yourself, because I think that's huge and something I'm a big kind of advocate for as well, why I got into building and making things. And I think a lot of people, because there's just something so satisfying about building something that, you might have used before or you were thinking of, and maybe it doesn't exist yet, and you put it into the world, physically. By making it yourself. And I'm sure you've had gotten to witness a ton of kind of aha moments around that with your students.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Do you ever get I think we're roughly the same age, and I feel like, I don't know, after so many years of building things on a computer where absolutely everything is tweakable and touchable, you realize that nothing is tactile. And it's, you really want to, it's wonderful to be able to actually touch something physically and move it around. So there's an element of unblack boxing that I think comes for a lot of people. And even the Walkman thing, it's kind of crazy. We get a whole bunch of kids that have for sure never used a Walkman before who take the workshop and, get a lot out of it. So that makes me really happy.
So as I was kind of online stalking your background, I was really interested to hear that you got this opportunity to do through the Thomas Watson Fellowship. You wrote in your bio that you went all over the world getting to work on compositions with experimental instruments. And I'd love to hear what were some of these experimental instruments. What does that look like? What does that mean? Were you building them on the spot? Did you take the same instrument around the world? Where did you get to go? And what were some of your highlights of that experience?
The Watson Fellowship was a weird, windfall for me. I got very lucky and I got selected to do this project. It's a really bizarre fellowship in that they award it to, I think, 40 people a year. And the idea is you have to leave the United States for one calendar year and not come back. And you can research, you apply with a proposal. And my proposal was experimental musical instruments. So my thought process behind this was, I went to music school where I learned to, compose for the standard set of instruments. And the thing that I thought was so interesting is that, as far as the standard set of instruments goes, the most recent one that was, has been added to the canon is the tuba, which was added to orchestras in 1908-ish or something like that, was when it really became adopted. So that's pretty old. It's before you have an electric grid nearly at the scale of, our grid today. It's before the sounds of electronics. Even really, people didn't encounter sounds that were very loud too frequently in the way that we think about it now. So the world sounds totally different. And if you were to take a person from 1908 and drop them here right now, just think about how alien absolutely everything would sound to them, even my accent and volume of voice or whatever. So I thought it would be interesting to try to rebuild an orchestra with a whole bunch of musical instruments that were contemporary, that catered in some way to, the 21st century ear and brain. And so I did the Watson totally wrong. You're supposed to do something like go to 5 different countries or something, and I went to 22 because I have the attention span of a goldfish. But I mean, I met some truly incredible people. Really, in every single corner of the world, there is some lovable eccentric in a garage who is building a strange musical instrument. And so much of the community building over the course of the Watson was, you meet one guy in Costa Rica who says, "Hey, you got to meet this guy in Peru," and then you go to Peru and he says, "Hey, you got to go check out this guy over here." And so, so that's kind of how it happens. It's such a weird niche hobby, but it's strange how people are motivated by kind of similar things in the quest for sounds that nobody's heard before.
So many follow-up questions. First, I want to rewind a little bit to you saying that technically the newest instrument to or the latest instrument was the tuba. That just like blew my mind for a moment.
In the orchestra, yeah.
In the orchestra, right. Who determines that was the latest instrument to enter the orchestra officially and that sort of thing? I'm curious what the governing body as far as that goes is.
Right. So yeah, the official orchestra governing body. No, so there's no governing body or anything like that. Music history is kind of strange. The tuba was actually, interestingly enough, adopted really widely for recording reasons. If you've seen like those, early Edison recording devices, which is what we were working on prior to like 1911 or something like that, it's like you're engraving into aluminum or wax or something. And in order to move that stylus up or down, right, you really got to like shout into a tube. So around that era, when physical recorded media became a thing, certain sounds like, a plucked bass sound just didn't really pick up very well. Sounds like deep brass, which are rich and resonant, those pick up really well in wax. So you'll notice if you look at a whole bunch of pieces of music, like a lot of jazz standards from the 1910s and stuff like that, it's all tuba parts, no string bass parts. And all the string bassists lost a job for a couple of years until recording technology improved. So there are a lot of weird technological reasons that the tuba was favored, but it started to be incorporated into orchestral music around first decade of the 20th century. And then eventually, like, it kind of just became codified because it appeared in enough arrangements.
We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, Kirk tells us how a community of builders and makers can lead an engineer to places they never would have imagined. Welcome back to The BOM, Engineering a Path Forward. I'm your host, Magenta Strongheart. When we left off, Kirk was spinning their tale of globe-trotting for experimental sounds. And no matter where you go, it seems people will always turn non-musical items into instruments. Okay, so the other part of what you're saying is that you went to 22 different countries in a year. And you mentioned that, it's kind of happening organically. It sounds like you would go to one place and then they introduce you need to check out so-and-so here and that sort of thing. And so how did this kind of all culminate? What were I hate to be, what were the results? It's not about that. Clearly it was an incredible, experience as well. But what did this kind of turn into for you? And maybe even regardless of what was required of the fellowship process, besides meeting so many amazing people all over, it sounds like, what did you create from this?
Right. Well, the deliverable was weirdly small. The only deliverable that the Watson Foundation mandates you do is you go to a conference and you give a 10-minute presentation on what you did for the last year. So I did that, passed with flying colors. That was fine. But yeah, I made a lot of art throughout the year. I met a lot of really amazing people. And like a lot of them too are like people that I still regularly work with, which is kind of fun in my commercial work. Every once in a while, I'm hired for a project that needs something really, really specific sounding. And, I have a whole Rolodex of people now that I can, hire to record any number of wonderful and strange sounds. But, I guess the real thing to come out of my fellowship was Dogbotic, honestly. I think it was really formative for me to see so many different, archetypes of creative communities around the world and to, note how some of them worked well in certain regards and didn't work well in other regards. I loved every individual I worked with, but I meant more of the politics of, how one creates and how one exists as an artist in the, 2020s. And so that was really what came out of it. So, I started Dogbotic, kind of as a means to be doing the work that interests me, which is, searching for unexpected sound sources, making instruments and composing with them. All of this kind of grew out of that. It's a fun, weird space to occupy, but I'm very happy with it. The instruments inventing community is really, really warm and really friendly. And I'm very lucky to be a part of it.
I can imagine how inspiring and awesome that experience was. And I feel like I definitely have kind of similar moments of, inspiration, just going to new places, meeting people that are doing things in a different way. And like you said, seeing different kind of prototypes or ways that people are organizing or structuring means to be creative and also, kind of financially sustainable and stable in their practice, which I think is a huge, obviously, huge focus and topic of conversation for artists everywhere in almost every kind of discipline, right? Is like, how do you balance the creative side of things and the money-making side of things? I think that that's something that's, as I was learning more about Dogbotic, something I felt was going to be very interesting to our audience as well, is to see kind of what you've developed and how you've organized, that structure within your studio as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually a great kind of segue to, you mentioned you now have this great Rolodex and you have clients that you work with on commercial projects, of course. And one that really stuck out to me, that I selfishly want to talk about because I'm a huge Rihanna fan, and I was a big fan of the Savage Fenty Volume 4 show. So when I saw that on your portfolio, I was like, wow, I got to ask them about this experience. So I remember watching that and thinking the animated portions were so interesting and not what I expected, having seen the previous shows that she had done for Savage Fenty. And so I'd love to hear more about how this project kind of came together. What were some of the most interesting parts of working on it? How much of it, I know in some of what I was reading about it, it sounded very collaborative. It wasn't just Dogbotic working on, some of the parts, but it does sound like you all really concepted and kind of designed from the jump, what it was going to look like and sound like. So tell us more.
Oh yeah, it was a blast to work on. So my buddy Nicole Stafford, who lives up in Oregon, she's an animator. And we worked on a number of projects together. We did an animated short of hers called The Hork, which went to Sundance, during the 1 year that it was canceled. She's a blast to work with. She's got, a really, wonderful, kooky sense of humor and also just, really like amazing visual sense. So she works with a studio called Oddfellows. It's based up in Portland. That's been one of my favorite clients to work with over the last several years. They're an animation house, that does, both commercial and artistic work. And, we see eye to eye on a lot of things creatively. And so we've been fortunate enough to work with them a lot. And, the Savage Fenty show was, they hired Nicole to do these, beautiful, surreal animated segments that kind of bridged the acts of the show. And Nicole wanted to do these, so there are 5 different, vignettes that, introduce the next, artist. And they're all done in the style of various, strange animators from the 70s and 80s. There's one that looks like Ralph Bakshi and stuff like that. So the sound was pretty carte blanche. She really let me, do whatever I wanted with it, which was a lovely, lovely thing about working with her. And so I was able to get pretty weird with it. So a lot of the sounds that you hear, in the sound design for those segments they're sounds that I record myself, like, me throwing rocks into the ocean or whatever, but also a whole bunch of like little homemade synthesizers that are, not dissimilar from the kind that we teach you how to build in the workshops. So I really like kind of composing that way. Like I can build a circuit in front of me, just have a live audio, feed of that going into a computer and mess around for 45 minutes. And I can kind of go through that and glean the parts that I like out of it and then collage with those.
I love that you kind of use the analogies of recipe and collage. I think that's really helpful. Just, I can say, at least for me, I'm someone, who's not so much in the musical audio composition world, here and there, but very infrequently. So to think of kind of the way you're putting these things together, I think it's really helpful to think of, other ways that people think of structuring something like a composition or how they work on a work of art in a way. As we're talking here, I was curious if you could tell us, as you were describing some of these synths too, I thought about it and what's, in the room behind you, a little bit about some of your favorite tools and the things you use to make the things you have to make, which is one of our favorite topics here on the BOM and for me personally.
Yeah, I like the recipe analogy, I think, because when you think in terms of process, you realize that by slightly changing your process, you will change the outcome. I feel like music school especially kind of put me in a weird bind where it taught me to think about writing music as a very specific process. Like you might build a chair in one particular way in your wood shop or something like that, But maybe that's not a perfect analogy because, a chair is ultimately functional. Yeah, when you're making a piece of art, changing your process is a really great way of changing your perspective. I think like a lot of how I was taught to think about music was you have an idea in your head, you pluck it out on the keyboard or something like that, and you notate it down, and that's how that works. But, that's not how you have to compose. I think it's equally valid to record 45 minutes of weird sounds and pluck out the best bits and, put those in a sequence. That's still composition to me.
I was going to say, as you were talking, trying to connect it to the chair idea, I can connect it for sure to some of the, I think, sculpture process that some of my my colleagues and I have, went through school as well, where it's like some people like to work in the kind of, I guess you could say traditional, like you're saying, just like mind to notes to product, essentially. They have a vision and they carve it out of wood or stone or whatever it might be. But there's also, I think, there's a very, I would say, kind of common process of more this collage or assembly kind of way where you're working with a lot of different modular parts. Like you like to make a lot of, little plaster casts, for example, or something like that. And then you do a lot of these drawings and you do this and these things very intuitively. And then it's what, you're able to draw together between these things that make the ultimate piece. And it is this kind of collage, or like you said, recipe, where the process is really informing, what's interesting about what you're able to create in the end. So totally picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, it's all happy accidents. There's a fun Wikipedia rabbit hole, if anyone is interested. There's an article that's a list of surrealist games that were played by, like salons of French people in the early 20th century. And they're all really weird. They're effectively recipes. They're things like heat some wax in a pot and then throw the molten wax into some ice water and it'll freeze into a shape, and take that out and sketch it. Stuff like that. Like they're just strange processes that you don't know what the end product is going to be, but the end product is going to be interesting somehow. And so, I think those kinds of things are really fun to teach. Because, I just want to encourage people to make something, not everything's going to be great. That's fine. Rapid prototype a lot of things and you'll have some good ones.
Totally. It all comes down to the editing, right? It's what you choose not to integrate into the end that's just as important as what you do choose to put into it. So yeah, I love that. I'm definitely going to have to look that up after this and learn more about some of those games. That sounds super fun.
They're fun. Good Saturday night. Yeah.
Obviously, like your kind of educational background, but also the different parts of what you're doing in the studio all work together and inform one another, which I think is very common and relatable to folks that move between kind of different disciplines or different aspects of their practice. And so I'd love to hear more about how you would say each kind of part of the business or part of your work informs the other, how, maybe working with some of your students ends up into some of your commercial work or into some of the research work and vice versa.
Well, it's for certain all related in some deep metaphysical sense. But yeah, in another regard, the halves of Dogbotic are, they do maintain a little bit of distance. But the processes that we teach are not dissimilar from the processes that we use when we're hired, to do work. I think at this point I describe Dogbotic more as like it's a collective of artists, and our job is to find excuses to give artists money to do things, whether that's through doing, commercial works, artworks, or teaching these workshops, and, that's how that model really works. So I think that's kind of ultimately the thing that they have in common. But yeah, I mean, really, in the end, like I think the ethical perspective that I have with the workshops about, how it's, it's important to take stuff apart. It's important to figure out how the world works. It's important to, remember that, you can make new sounds that have not been heard, and, those sounds have cultural significance to them. Those are absolutely part of the philosophy of everything that we make in the studio.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I love what you said about it's an excuse really to give money to artists to make more things because this is important work. So
Yeah, it is. And, we all need to eat.
yes, yes, of course. And I also don't want to bring it up as like just like a buzzword kind of thing, but I am curious to hear your perspective on what's kind of new in AI when it comes to music production and sound design. What do you think is like, most promising in that regard? And what are you kind of more worried about if you're willing to share?
I'm worried about it making culture even more bland than it already is. That's my fundamental concern. I think a lot of my concerns about AI are really concerns about either culture or capitalism, really. Like I'm worried about people losing their jobs. But then again, for, hundreds of years, a lot of blue collar work has been replaced, and people haven't been up in arms about that in the way that they are up in arms about AI. But a thing I was thinking of recently, was drum machines. So this is really weird. I remember growing up, the attitude towards so much electronic music, at least in my circles, was one of kind of active disdain. Like I recall people talking about, like electronic music as, computers playing music or something like that, and how, it was devoid of soul or, whatever. And nowadays that perspective seems totally ridiculous. But, for many years in the early aughts, the idea that you would have a computer playing music actively seemed to annoy a lot of people, in that you would be taking jobs away from musicians. And I remember, like, I can remember several, like, goofy comedies that, like, display, like, an archetype of an electronic music person, and it's always like this weird little dweeb who's antisocial versus, like the power rock guitarists or something like that, which are, cool and hip and sexy. And I think that's so interesting. That was a really serious, like, cultural perspective that a lot of people had for a long time. And nowadays, that's more or less gone. And it would be ridiculous to say that, electronic music killed music or anything like that. So, I do want to maintain, like a healthy perspective. I don't know how AI is going to be used. The aspects to me that I think are most interesting are when it hallucinates. That's what I'm into. I think it's cool to misuse AI and to see what it does, because it's going to be, every once in a while, it's going to be spuriously brilliant.
Like you said, there's one side of things where that's obviously something we've seen over and over again is this fear, but there's also a side of things of like being still cautious and aware of what some of the implications will be. And yeah, I agree that, like, you're bringing up our video being online, of course, and what that's going to look like in the future, and the direction that deep fakes and things are going can definitely be a whole other rabbit hole and overwhelming to think about. But I think, yeah, as long as we keep talking about these things and, everyone's able to have more, I think, honestly, not to get too, like, I don't know, cheesy, but I do think more conversations and more like working together in these interesting spaces like what you've created at Dogbotic, having a collective where there's a lot of different perspectives and opinions, working together and creating new things and playing with new things and leaving that opportunity for experimentation. And that will all inform, the directions that some of this goes. So I want to be conscientious of our time here. I feel like we could go on and on about some of these things, but we're going to wrap it up shortly. So we have a few kind of quicker questions for the end here. Really quick, actually, before we get into them, though, I did want to hear how you guys came up with the name Dogbotic, because I'm sure people are curious where that came from.
Dogbotic was named after I wrote down a long list of really silly names. The mentality of Dogbotic was it's a ridiculous name, and you have to have a sense of humor in order to consider hiring us. And it's actually worked out pretty well. I think, there are so many unfun audio jobs that have to be done. And I don't know how, but for the last 5 years, we have been able to avoid them.
That is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
You're doing something right there then. Do you remember any of the names you guys crossed off the list?
One I do remember was Harmonic Dog, also dog related, which is one of the many dogs in George Clinton's Atomic Dog that he lists at the beginning of the song, where there's, the rhythm dog, the melodic dog, the harmonic dog. But I think someone else already took it or something, so Dogbotic is what we got.
Not too far away from that, yeah.
No, not too far off. Everyone likes dogs and everyone likes robots, Nothing funnier than a robot dog.
Ta-da. Do you have a robot dog? That's the next question.
No, we don't.
You need a robot dog mascot.
So some people have made little sculptures of them and something. Man, we have a lot of illustrators. Oh shoot, I don't know if I can even show you this. We had a whole bunch of illustrators illustrate different robotic dogs for a series that we did.
Oh, that's fun.
So we have a bunch of them. But yeah, they're like a little kind of exquisite corpsey thing where you can flip through them and make the robot dog of your dreams. So yeah.
Very fun. All right. And for our last couple of questions, what is one non-technology related thing that's inspiring you currently?
Oh gosh, what is one non-technology related thing that is inspiring me currently? How do you define technology?
I think that's up to you.
Oh geez. A non-technology related thing that is inspiring to me. I'm gonna go with a fish taco. Fish tacos are new to my life, but they're absolutely delicious, and I don't know why nobody told me this before. So there you go. That's my answer. Confident.
How new to you are they? Like a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago?
Yeah. I'd say 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, I had my inaugural fish taco, and
no
Magenta,
way.
it changed my life. What can I say?
Wow.
I'm brand new. Got a spring in my step.
Honestly, not surprised. Fish tacos are delicious, and I can't believe you had your first one 3 weeks ago. Especially because how long have you been in California?
Yeah, exactly, right. You raised the obvious question. Yeah, no, clearly too long for this.
No judgment, but well, I love that answer. That's definitely unique. We have not had someone respond with a food item before, so
well, there you go.
You get points for originality. And last but not least, what's on your personal bill of materials? Also totally up to interpretation.
I thought of a couple different ways to interpret it. It can be in terms of electronic components, it can be in terms of musical instruments, or it can be just in terms of sounds that I use a lot in my work that are like my personal toolkit.
Well, now that you've told me the 3 options, I want to hear all 3, of course.
Oh, geez. All 3. All right, so let's go with electronic components. 5 favorite electronic components. I will say the CD4093 NAND gate. Interpreting that as a thumbs up. A fantastic integrated circuit, a very popular one. You can do so many musical things with it, and it was never intended to be a musical instrument. It is simply a logic gate. But yeah, you can hook it up as an oscillator, as an inverter, as so many different things. I would also include the relay. I do love a good relay. So a relay is a little it's electromechanical switch, right? You can give it a little tiny, small voltage and turn on a much bigger voltage. So relays are a lot of fun. I love doing projects that turn on and off lights or turn on and off, hot plates that have whistling tea kettles on top of them or something like that. And relays are a really pragmatic way of doing that. I love the ISD 1820, also an integrated circuit that was built, I think, for washing machines originally. It can hold a 10-second bit of 12-bit audio or something like that, so it sounds terrible. But you can buy them for really cheap, and they're really easy to work with. And so you can create a little thing that can record a couple seconds of your voice, and you can play it back at different pitches or whatever. So I'm a big fan of that, and that's really fun to teach people. Let's go on. Musical instruments. 5 favorite musical instruments. I'm going to go with the mandolin, my primary instrument. The cello, also an instrument I've played for a long time. The bass clarinet, big fan. The chromatic accordion. And let's go. Oh, I know. These are my absolute favorite thing. They're called, whirly tubes. I think they're beautiful. These things are absolutely wonderful. I incorporate them in a lot of different stuff I do. They're really, really cheap. They're fun to give out at concerts and have everyone whirl along to them. So that's my number 5. And the 5 sounds that I use most frequently, let's go with an orchestra tuning, a submarine sonar pinging, the sound of a bell on a buoy in the ocean, I really like. The sound of... I really love combining the sound of like electrical hum with the sounds of choirs. That's a thing that I've been doing a lot lately. They sound really beautiful when you arrange them together. So I've been kind of using those as a lot of like deep, droney, bassy pads in a lot of my music recently. And the 5th sound I use really frequently is this, which is a weird sound effect that I can do with my mouth.
Wow.
That I put in absolutely every job I do.
Thank you so much for that very thorough answer.
It was a good question.
You're the first one to actually answer with electronics components. No one has ever done that, which is kind of surprising when you think about it now. So,
that's what I assumed the definition.
I know we've talked to a lot of engineers who obviously know, what a typical bill of materials is, but people take it very like loosely. They'll say their tools or exercise or their families or whatever. And I love that you just went for no. This is great. I love that this question gets so many different answers too. So it's always super fun. And even within, engineering or designer or artist kind of communities, it's always something different. So that's because humans are awesome and different.
To my family, if you're listening, I love you, and you will always make it onto my bill of materials.
On that note, thank you so much, Kirk. This was a super fun conversation.
Hey, thank you.
I hope that we get the opportunity to work with Dogbotic more in the future. And good luck with all the upcoming workshops and things and bringing events back live. And people should find you. We'll put the links in our show notes. You can send us anything you're interested in sharing with our community as far as that goes. But obviously, they'll find you now that they know all about you. So thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much, Magenta. This was a lot of fun.
That was Kirk Pearson, founder of Dogbotic, on the importance of having a space to research weird and culturally relevant sounds. Their work and educational tools can certainly change the way people interact with engineering tools and sounds. This has been The BOM, Engineering a Path Forward. If you like The BOM, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow Supplyframe and Hackaday on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Design Lab at Supplyframe Design Lab on Instagram and Twitter. The BOM is a Supplyframe podcast produced by me, Magenta Strongheart, and Ryan Tillotson. Written by Maggie Bowles and edited by Daniel Ferreira. Theme music is by Anna Hogbin, show art by Thomas Schneider, special thanks to Giovanni Salinas, Bruce Dominguez, Thomas Woodward, Jin Kumar, Jordan Clark, the entire Supplyframe team, and you, our wonderful listeners. I'm your host, Magenta Strongheart. See you next week.